Right now is perhaps the most dangerous moment of Vladimir Putin's 26 years as Russian dictator, because internally we see that the Russian economy is cracking up, but externally we see that Russia is running out of friends fast. But more than that, there is something even more important, and that is what is happening within the Kremlin. Because within the Kremlin, we see there's increasing tension, and that tension is beginning to boil over. The oligarchical classes no longer get along with each other. They realize that there is a serious problem with FSB. The FSB has been seizing assets from the elites because there's simply not enough money for everybody. But perhaps the greater stress that we see across Russian society is not coming from the economy, nor from a war in a different country. It's in fact coming from Vladimir Putin, because Vladimir Putin today understands that his regime is under threat. And because his regime is under threat, he's doing what's necessary to make the people of Russia believe the situation is becoming dangerous. But to make it feel like it's more dangerous, he needs to, in fact, make it more dangerous. And that's what he's doing today. We see in Russia today, they're doing civil air alerts across the country. But what's the need for that? Why across 11 time zones should they do these air raid alerts? It's because they want the population to fear. They want the population to believe that they too could soon be under attack. All of this is part of a greater plan, a plan to consolidate control. Because Vladimir Putin knows one thing about Russian history. If in doubt, consolidate control. Always use the justification of an external enemy and internal traitors if you wish to keep the control of your country in your hands. And right now, that is what he's doing. But there's another lesson from history that Vladimir Putin should pay more attention to. And that is that he who begins this game can oftentimes be the one who loses it. And he is the one who loses the Kremlin forever. My name is Dr. Jason Smart. I'm a Kyiv Post special correspondent and a national security advisor. So no matter what Vladimir Putin says, it is very clear his regime is becoming weakened, and that weakness is something that emanates from Vladimir Putin through all the steps that he's taking right now. Help us get to the world of what's really going on inside of Russia and why Ukraine should be supported now. Please subscribe to this channel, like this video, hype it, write your comments below, and share this video with others. And consider becoming a channel member today. So the Putin regime is truly becoming much more complicated. Every day, there's something else coming out from there. And what's the most interesting part, though, is that a lot of what we see is, in fact, being created by the Kremlin. The Kremlin is creating its own problems. Look at the situation with Iran. Though Russia is trying to separate itself from that, it is not trying to directly help Iran, at least publicly. The Iranian foreign minister said quite the opposite. In fact, in an interview on America's NBC on the 6th of March, he said that, in fact, Russia and China are both helping Iran. That's an interesting revelation. Sure enough, we have found drones with Russian parts used to attack American and European facilities in the Middle East. But there's another part of this which is also very important. It's not just as an external war. There's an external war that Russia now has a justification to do what Putin wants. Putin for years has talked about the possibility of a nuclear war. That nuclear war is becoming quite more likely. But even if there is not a war of this sort, Putin has all justification he needs to tell the world that it could happen. Now that helps him in a lot of ways. One, he knows the Westerners are terrified of this possibility. He has routinely threatened the possibility of nuclear war. That is an old trick that he never gets tired of. But it also allows him to do things like make sure that he has a bigger military. In fact, he signed a decree that set the armed forces staffing at 2,400,000 units, including 1,500,000 military personnel. Now, when you create a military that big, you can obviously fight a very serious war with any other country in Europe. But is it really that they need that big of a military? Or is it because Vladimir Putin wants to pick up young men from the streets to make sure there's nobody to rebel against him? Which reminds me, we have a fundraiser right now that's being matched by a very generous donor. If you'd like to donate, check out the first pinned comment below to help save the lives of Ukrainian soldiers. Thank you. Look at the censorship that we see going on with Telegram. It's set the Russian military back a huge amount. Right now in the front lines, Russian units cannot communicate with each other because they have no communication system. Using Soviet radios is not very secure, so they were using Telegram. But now, in order to protect the Putin regime, Telegram is blocked. So what was the real reason for that? Was that really, though, because they care about what the population of Russia thinks? Or is that because they fear that soldiers could coordinate with each other against the government? Or do they fear that the young men of Russia, not wishing to go to a war, would coordinate themselves against the government? In all cases, they are doing what they can to crack down on people and make sure that they cannot unite against the government. But if more security is needed inside of Russia, that also justifies something else: to root out those who are working for the enemy, to identify those who are a threat. Things like Telegram, they could be one of those threats, but they can also obviously be people. We saw the same thing, though, in the 1920s and 1930s in Soviet propaganda. It normalized a ring of enemies and a besieged fortress sort of logic, framing everything that goes on externally as being a threat. What happens internally is perhaps a danger if it's radicalized, and that's why the state must suppress those who wish to overturn the Kremlin's authority. But Vladimir Putin, he's added a new layer to that. He talks about another world war. That, though, is not so new. We know that the Soviets oftentimes brought up the threat of a world war. In fact, one of the largest holidays of the Soviet Union was May 9th. It was Victory Day. Now, why was that such a big deal in the Soviet Union? Because they wanted people to always have present in their memory the Second World War. Now, the Soviet Union took massive losses during that war, losing about 26 million people. But the fact is, they did not have Victory Day in the 1940s or in the 1950s. It was only much later, well after the Second World War, that became a holiday. That became a code word. It meant, prepare yourself. We might one day have to relive this. The entire point of World War II being central to Russia's narrative is specifically that. So population thinks about, contemplates the need that one day they too might have to live in the bombing of their city. Vladimir Putin wants his population to be prepared for this so that they're easier to control, easier to manipulate. And he's been very effective at that. Because across Russia right now, we see more and more signs the government is clamping down on people. It's making it impossible for them to live normal lives. Now, of course, there are some people who get fed up with this and they leave. For the regime, that's completely fine. Russia doesn't want people in its country who are not going to conform. Why do they need somebody who's going to create problems? Better you leave than stick around, and we make you leave. So today, we see that Russia is branding people as foreign agents. That means simply people who have worked with foreign countries or with foreigners. And these are all called security measures. They're, of course, not security measures. They're really just purges. But those purges are spreading. Look in the Kremlin. We saw recently how Patrushev, a long-term friend of Vladimir Putin, was replaced from office. We've seen others removed just in the past few months as well. But these removals, one after another, is sort of alarming. But it's probably even more alarming for somebody like Sergei Shoigu. Sergei Shoigu is the former Minister of Defense of Russia. He is actually a friend of Vladimir Putin's. But we saw that his top deputies have all been arrested. But when you arrest people, such as the top deputies of former defense minister Sergei Shoigu, that creates a lot of fear in the population. If somebody who is a personal friend, like Shoigu, is no longer safe, his top deputies are no longer protected, everybody understands that it is open hunting, and nobody is going to be safe inside of Russia. Now, Vladimir Putin understands that it's not hard to turn on his population with the idea of fear, that there are enemies all about. We've seen the recent attacks going on in the Caucasus, with Azerbaijan, with Armenia, and that's where Russia has great influence. But it's also where Iran has great influence, and that's where things come to a head. This situation, that region specifically, Armenia, Turkey, Iran, Azerbaijan, all bordering near each other, this is a region that could become a powder keg. And if a problem were to blow up there, Vladimir Putin can bet safely that the world's attention would again shift. And the more it shifts away from Russia to other regions, that works in his interest. Likewise, the ongoing attacks within Iran, that's not necessarily so negative, because that means today there's going to be less weapons for Ukraine. Vladimir Putin has already calculated that the West doesn't have an endless supply of weapons. And if it has to pick or choose, obviously it's going to keep the weapons for itself. And that's why today this war, the longer it drags on, the better it is for him. Though, of course, Russia is not willing to risk itself by coming out publicly to support Iran, we know it's helping behind the scenes. As the foreign minister of Iran admitted, Russia as a whole, historically, has been quite clever about using geopolitical shifts to its advantage. In fact, President Zelensky alluded to that just yesterday. Russia historically has always been ahead of the ball of trying to figure out how to use any crisis to make sure that it gets ahead, that it works to its advantage. Vladimir Putin's regime is one where his interests have always gone first, and they will always go first. But because of that, other people should fear what it means if the dictator is sick. In fact, a recent video came out showing that Vladimir Putin, in recent discussions, was most likely not actually present. The videos look like they were taped weeks ago. Many people have started to question again why his face looks so distorted, why it is that he doesn't appear for weeks at a time. What is he doing? Is it because he himself lives in such fear that he's in a bunker? Or is it because he simply is no longer with us? That is actually possible as well. Most likely, though, it's something very simple. That he simply is disconnected from this situation. He has decided to leave his deputies to this so he can be far away from Moscow and not have to personally intervene. But Vladimir Putin understands there are plenty of people around him that are looking for any sign of weakness, any sign that the old Lion King's days have come to an end. And as his reign ends, the younger lion is looking to take his spot. But because the regime is weaker, it is becoming more reactive. It is obviously not stronger. The Iran war gives Putin a justification for repression, for mobilization, and for purges. Sirens are used to condition the public like Pavlov's dogs. They also decree some sort of a manpower, some preparation, and they allow for censorship. They allow for coordination. They allow for people to become used to seeing the military in the streets. And when people see military in the streets, that's supposed to make them feel secure. But everybody understands when you see lots of military in the streets, rarely will it make you feel much secure if just days before there were no military in the streets. People understand that means that their society is becoming closed. But Vladimir Putin is aiming for that. Not because he really cares about the people of Russia, but simply because he understands a tightly controlled population is an easily controlled population. However, no matter what we see going on in Moscow today, it's important to remember one key thing. No matter what Putin says, he is losing in Ukraine. As always, thank you for supporting Ukraine.